rings in the black cold of the night. Not at dawn, not when the room is softened into grey. In the deep dark, a monk opens his eyes, and for a few small moments he is only a man in bed, warm under wool, with winter pressing at the shutters. Then the bell rings again. He has to rise. He does not get to weigh the matter. He does not get to tell himself 5 more minutes. He does not get to wait for the room to warm. In a Benedictine monastery, the night office is not a kind thought. It is a duty. It comes whether the wind is loud or the air is still. It comes when a man is strong. It comes when he has a cough. It comes in old age. It comes in snow. This office is called Matins. For many monks in medieval England, it meant getting out of bed at an hour that would now feel almost cruel. In the rule that shaped their lives, Saint Benedict says the monks are to rise in the middle of the night to praise God. Later custom in English houses made that rule part of a strict and familiar pattern, not for a week, not for a season, but for years, sometimes for a whole life. Picture the room, a long sleeping space, stone walls, timber above, straw mattresses or pallet beds, close enough that one man stirring could wake another. The dark, not soft and modern, but thick and real. No glow from a street lamp, no bright line under a door, just the scrape of cloth, a breath, a cough, the sound of someone finding his feet on the floor. Somewhere nearby, another monk is doing the same thing, and another. No one is pleased about it. That would be too simple. Holiness did not turn cold flags warm, or winter stares kind, but they rose anyway, night after night, year after year. That is the first hard fact to keep in mind. A monastery was not only a place of peace, it was also a place of schedule, a place where prayer was not fitted around comfort. Comfort was fitted, as best it could be, around prayer. The whole house moved by bells and hours. Sleep had its place, food had its place, work had its place, silence had its place, even weakness had its place, though a man might need leave to step aside from the rule if he was truly ill. Most days, though, the bell won, and this was not some lonely cave in a desert of the mind. Let's place it properly. We are in 12th century England, in a Benedictine monastery shaped by the customs that followed the Norman conquest. A good real anchor for it is Christ Church Priory at Canterbury, one of the great monastic houses in the land. Not a tiny hut, not a ruined shell, a living place, busy and ordered, tied to one of the most important churches in England. Men slept here, prayed here, copied books here, cooked here, argued here, fell ill here, aged here, and were buried from here. It was a holy house. It was also, in its own quiet way, a place of administration, storage, repair, traffic, memory, and endless routine. That is worth pausing on. When many of us think of a medieval monastery, we think first of stillness. A candle, a book, a hood, a long silence. And yes, all of that belonged there. But so did sore knees, wet cloaks, bean pottage, ink stains, leaky roofs, ledgers, garden tools, fish ponds, guests at the gate, monks who sang well, monks who did not, men who loved the order of the life, men who likely struggled with it for decades. The rule behind all this had been written centuries earlier by Benedict of Nursia, but it did not stay locked in its first age. It travelled, it was copied, it was lived and argued over and adapted. In England, after 1066, men such as Lanfranc, Archbishop of Canterbury, helped shape how Benedictine custom worked in practice in great English houses. His constitutions did not replace St. Benedict. They narrowed the screws a bit. They made old ideals fit the daily running of a real monastery in a real place with real weather, real buildings, and real tired men. So when the bell sounds in the dark, we are hearing more than one moment. We are hearing a whole system. A monk sleeps in a dorter, the shared sleeping room. He wakes by rule. He dresses by habit, in both senses of the word. He goes down into the cold with the others. He enters church not because he has had a burst of private feeling, but because the hour has come, and the hour belongs to God. That may sound severe. It was severe, but it was also meant to do something very plain. It took the drifting mess of human time and cut it into pieces. Night, prayer. Dawn, prayer. Morning work, prayer again. Meals, reading, more prayer. Sleep. Then the bell, and the whole thing starts once more. It was a life built from return. A man might enter as a novice while still young and hear those bells for 50 years. He might hear them in a hard frost. He might hear them with aching joints. He might hear them while grieving a friend. He might hear them after a feast day when the candles burned late. He might hear them while rain hit the roofs and drains outside. He might hear them knowing he had nodded off in choir the night before and would fight sleep again before morning. There is a strange kind of honesty in that. The medieval monastery asked very little of mood. It asked much more of repetition. That is why the life can feel so distant and so familiar at once. Most of us have never risen to chant psalms in Latin at 2 a.m, but most of us do know what it is to live by a duty that does not care how cozy the bed is. We know alarms. We know the dread of cold floors. We know the mind trying to bargain with the dark. The monk knew that too. He just met it under older terms. And at Canterbury, we can even put a name to one of the men who lived inside this ordered world. His name was Gervase. Gervase of Canterbury became a monk of Christ Church in the 12th century. He later served as sacristan, a keeper of the church's sacred things, and he wrote history as well. He was not every monk. No one man could be. But he gives us a human outline inside the stone. A man who kept the round of monastic life and also watched his own age closely enough to leave words behind. That matters. It reminds us that monasteries were not filled with wax figures. They were filled with people whose feet hurt, whose memories lasted, whose pens scratched over parchment after long days, and who still had to rise when the bell told them to. Now, in the first minutes after waking, none of that grand history would have helped much. The bed is still warm. The air is not. A monk pulls on his clothes in darkness or near darkness. He knows the shape of them by touch. This is not the hour for fuss. Somewhere a man mutters a prayer under his breath. Somewhere another moves stiffly because his back has started to betray him in the cold. Someone younger is faster. Someone older is slower. But the room is rising now because the house itself has begun to rise. Then comes the walk, down the stair, along the passage, into the church. The stone is cold enough to seem almost damp. The air carries old smoke, wool, and a faint draft from places where the building never quite keeps out the season. Lamps burn, not many, just enough. Faces are half there and half not. In that poor light, every monk looks a little like a ghost of himself. And then they begin to sing, not because they feel musical, because this is what the night is for. St. Benedict's rule gives a great deal of space to the ordering of these offices. Which psalms? How many? What comes on Sundays? What changes on the feast days? It is detailed in a way that can feel almost startling at first, but that detail tells us something important. The monastery did not run on vague good intentions. It ran on sequence. The order of the office was part of the life, just as surely as bread was part of the meal and a wall was part of the cloister. The men in choir are not there as private seekers, each following his own mood. They are a body. One stumbles, and the sound can drag. One loses his place, and the order frays. One is absent, and the gap is felt. The work of praise is shared work. That too is part of the hardness. You are tired together. You are responsible together. And still, even here, the monastery is larger than the choir. That is easy to miss in the dark. While the monks file into church, the rest of the monastic world is still around them, waiting for morning. Kitchens will need tending. Fires will need coaxing back to life. Water will run through pipes and channels. Bread will be set out later. Accounts will sit where they were left. A guest may already be sleeping under the priory roof. A sick brother may remain in the infirmary. Servants and workers attached to the house will wake on different terms, but they too belong to this world. The bell governs the monks most sharply, yet the whole place lives in widening circles around that sound. So when we say what life was really like in a medieval monastery, we do not mean only the great church and the chanting in the dark. We mean the whole small country contained inside walls, the sleeping room and the kitchen, the chapter house and the drain, the herb garden and the fish pond, the scriptorium perhaps, if the house had such work underway, the porter at the gate, the cellarer counting stores, the old monk near the fire, the novice trying not to yawn in public. That is the true hook of it, if you like. Not only that they woke in the dark, but that they built an entire human life around doing so. It sounds grim at first. Then it starts to seem almost orderly. Then, if you sit with it long enough, it becomes something stranger still. A life with very little privacy, very little softness, very little choice in the shape of the day. And yet, for many men, it was the chosen life. Hard, yes. Repetitive, deeply, but also legible. The bell tells you where you are. The rule tells you what comes next. The house holds you inside a pattern larger than your own restlessness. We should not make it prettier than it was. A monk could be bored. He could be chilled through. He could be hungry on a fast day and sleepy in the stalls and annoyed by the brother next to him. He could fail. He could break silence. He could grow dull with routine. He could long, now and then, for ease. Medieval people were not made of sterner flesh than ours, but we should not flatten it either, because inside that long discipline, there were textures, tiny ones often. The feel of the stair rail under the hand, the look of the church just before dawn, the private relief of sitting after standing through the office, the small joy of warmth, the great plain fact of bread, the voice of one brother better than the rest, the shame of nodding off, the comfort of hearing familiar psalms yet again. That is where the real life is, not only in the rule, in the keeping of it. And so the bell fades, the chant rises, the dark begins very slowly to thin, and a medieval monastery comes into focus not as a symbol, but as a place, built of stone, timber, wool, smoke, water, and habit. A place where men tried day after day and night after night to make a life out of prayer, labour, obedience, and the stubborn fact of having bodies that were often cold and sometimes tired. Soon the sky outside will begin to lighten over Canterbury. The church will no longer be the only world there is. Corridors, courts, drains, roofs, workshops, gardens and guest rooms will return from darkness one by one. And once the bell has done its work, we can step out into that wider waking place. Source notes for Act 1. Benedict's rule frames the night office as a core part of monastic life and sets out detailed orders for matins and the daily hours. Benedict also says, "In the middle of the night am I wont to rise and praise thee." Lanfranc's constitutions are a key source for Canterbury custom, and Gervase of Canterbury was a monk and later sacristan of Christchurch Priory in the 1190s. By first light, the monastery is no longer just a bell and a stair in the dark. It spreads outward, stone after stone, court after court, a whole small world waking inside its walls. The sky over Canterbury is still pale and wet-looking. The roofs hold the night's damp. The paths are cold. Somewhere water is already moving, even before the cooks are fully at work and before the town beyond the priory has found its own voice. Christchurch Priory was not a lonely chapel with a few pious men drifting through it. It was a great Benedictine house joined to Canterbury Cathedral, ordered by rule and custom, and built out into a network of church, cloister, dormitory, refectory, chapter house, kitchen, infirmary, storerooms, guest spaces, gardens, drains and workshops. The rule of St. Benedict gave the life its shape, and Canterbury custom, especially as formed under Lanfranc, gave that shape a practical English body. At the centre stood the church, because of course it did, everything bent toward it. The bells came from there. The offices drew the monks there again and again. The church was the great breathing chest of the monastery, but around it sat the rest of the body. A cloister walk for passing and reading, a chapter house for meetings and correction, a refectory for meals, a daughter or dormitory for sleep, a rear daughter, the latrine block, carried off where drains and water could do their necessary work, a warming house, sometimes the one place where a monk might stand near a proper fire in winter and feel, for a few minutes, that his fingers still belong to him. This is one of the first useful truths about medieval monasteries. They were holy places. There were also systems. They had to move people, water, waste, food, books, cloth, fuel, and time. They had to do it every day, not once, not when a king visited, every day. The more you look at a monastery, the less it feels like a dreamy ruin, and the more it feels like a machine built out of prayer, memory, and stone. A very slow machine, a very beautiful one sometimes, but still a machine. Canterbury is unusually kind to us here because part of that world was drawn. In the 12th century, a plan of the Cathedral Priory and its water system was made and later preserved in the great manuscript, often called the Unwind Psalter. It shows not only pipes and channels, but also the arrangement of buildings around them. This matters because monasteries are often imagined as still and silent, but this plan reminds us that they were busy with flow. Water flowed, people flowed, work flowed. The whole place depended on movement, and the water itself is worth lingering over. Prior Wybert, who led the priory in the mid-12th century, is linked with the installation of a notable water system at Canterbury. Spring water was brought toward the priory and carried through lead pipes. That meant cleaner supply for washing, kitchens, the infirmary, and latrines. And it meant a monastery that was, in some ways, more technically clever than many later people would guess. We should not turn that into a fairy tale of medieval plumbing perfection. Pipes leak, drains clog. Winter does what winter does. But Canterbury's waterworks were real, planned, and important. So let's walk it slowly. The church rises first in the mind, big, cold, full of shadow in the early hour. Nearby, the cloister garth sits as an open square of air and grass, ringed by covered walks. This is one of the places most people picture when they think of monastic life, and fairly enough. Here monks pass from one part of the house to another. Here they read. Here they cross paths without lingering. Stone underfoot. Arcades holding the weather at bay as best they could. Light changing through the arches as the day moved on. Off one side lies the chapter house. That was not just an office. It was one of the moral rooms of the monastery. Here a chapter of the rule might be read. Here faults could be confessed. Here the abbot or prior could address the house. Here names and duties and failures could become public. Medieval monastic life was not private self-improvement. It was communal correction. You lived among witnesses. Then the refectory. Long tables, benches, a reader's place, bread, bowls, cups, the sound of dishes, though not much free chatter. Meals in Benedict's world were meant to be orderly, and silence, or near silence, was part of that order. Not because speech was evil, but because words had to be rationed like other comforts. In some houses, signs were used to ask for simple needs without breaking silence. Medieval monks, it turns out, could ask for a knife or bread with their hands if needed. It is a practical sort of holiness. Then the daughter, long, shared, and very unlike a modern bedroom. Sleep here was communal. You were not sealed off inside your own chosen quiet. You were surrounded by breathing, turning, coughing, dreaming men. The dormitory was linked closely to the church because the night office made distance a problem. If the bell rang in the cold dark, you wanted the stairs to be short and familiar. A sleepy monk is less likely to lose his way if the building has been teaching his feet the same route for 20 years. That is the sort of wisdom monasteries often had. They arranged architecture around weakness, not to remove weakness. That would have been too much to hope for, but to guide it. The route from bed to choir, the route from kitchen to refectory, the route from infirmary to care, the route from latrine to drain. A monastery was full of souls, yes. It was also full of paths. And then there is the less romantic side, the drains, the latrines, the water channels. These belong here every bit as much as candles and chant. Monks had bodies. Many monks together had many more problems. A big priory had to keep waste moving away from living space. At Canterbury, the surviving plan makes plain that hydraulics, planning was not an afterthought. It was part of the place. Even the most devout house still needed somewhere for dirty water to go. It is one of the calming things about history, in a way. Human dignity has always needed drainage. Beyond the core cloister buildings sat the working edges of monastic life. Kitchens and bakehouses, cellars and storerooms, gardens for herbs and food, possibly workshops for repair and craft, guest halls for visitors, space for almsgiving, a gatehouse, because monasteries were enclosed communities, but never fully sealed ones. Goods came in, news came in, pilgrims came in, beggars came in, letters came in. Monasteries prayed for the world, but they also dealt with it all day long. This is where the smell of the place becomes important. Not one smell, many. Cold stone after rain, wood smoke that has got into wool, wet earth from the garden, ale and bread near the kitchen, wax in the church, a trace of fish, a less pleasant trace from the drains on a bad day, ink, parchment, and scraped skin where books are being made or mended. No one standing in the middle of this would think, "Ah, yes, the clean, blank smell of the medieval past." The place would have been layered, thick with use. And then the sounds. Here too, the modern dream of total monastic silence needs a gentle correction. Silence mattered. The rule of Saint Benedict praises restraint in speech, especially at night. English Heritage's work on monastic sound makes the point neatly. Monasteries were meant to shape noise, not erase it. So yes, there were hours and places of quiet, but there were also bells, chant, reading aloud in the refectory, footsteps in cloister walks, doors, tools, carts, work in kitchens, voices where duty required them, and the small, endless sounds of many men living close together. If this is helping you unwind, a subscribe means more of these quiet nights. Now, back to Canterbury. By daylight, the priory would also show its rank and order more clearly. Not all monks did the same things, even if all were under the same rule. There was a prior. There were officers with special charges. The cellarer oversaw stores and provisioning. The sacrist cared for the church and its things. The infirmarian tended the sick. The precentor handled chant and books for worship. The porter kept the gate. Novices were still being shaped into monks. Senior brothers carried memory in their bones and knew the custom so well they could likely have found half the monastery in fog. The name men helped this world feel less blurred. Lanfranc, archbishop in the late 11th century, matters because the customs linked with him helped form the life at Canterbury that later 12th century monks inherited. He is one of the reasons the house had such a distinct English Benedictine pattern. Then there is Edwine, the monk associated with the Great Psalter that preserves the priory plan. We do not know every detail about him for certain, and scholars still argue over exactly what role he played in the making of the book. But even that uncertainty is useful. It gives us a real monastic name, not a legend, attached to real work done inside this world. And then Gervase. Gervase of Canterbury was a monk here, later a sacristan and a writer. He watched events. He wrote them down. He lived not in a vague medieval atmosphere, but in these kinds of rooms, by these kinds of customs, under these bells. He is especially valuable because he reminds us that a monk was not just a silent extra in the background of history. He could also be a careful observer with cold hands and a working memory. Still, most men in the priory left no such record. They passed through the same spaces without attaching their names to them. They swept, sang, read, coughed, stood, ate, and died. Their lives survived mostly through rules, plans, building remains, account scraps, and the routines that shaped them. That means the building often speaks for them. A stair tells us how often someone had to hurry in the dark. A drain tells us how many bodies a house expected to manage. A long bench tells us that meals were shared, not chosen. A cloister walk tells us that motion itself had been trained into a pattern. Outside the monastery wall lay Canterbury itself, with shops, homes, mud, trade. and the long roads that brought people into town. The priory was not the whole city, but it was deeply woven into. The floor is cold first, before the prayer is fully done with him, before the day has a name, before hunger has properly woken. The monk knows the floor. Stone keeps the night in it. Even in warmer months, it can feel stern. In winter, it feels like a lesson. He stands on it anyway. The hardest waking happened at Matins. That much is true. But morning in a Benedictine house did not arrive all at once. It came in parts. First the bell in the deep dark, then the church, then the slow return toward light. Depending on the season, there could be a little more rest after the night office, or a drift straight on into the next round of prayer as dawn drew near. Saint Benedict's rule changes the pattern by season, because winter nights and summer nights are not the same, and monasteries had to live with real weather rather than tidy ideas about it. So the monk wakes more than once. He wakes when the bell drags him from sleep. He wakes again when cold air finds his neck in church. He wakes a third time when the first grey light begins to soften the world outside the priory walls. This third waking is gentler. Not pleasant, exactly, just less severe. The worst shock is over. The day is beginning to settle into its grooves. Back in the daughter, or else still moving from church to cloister, he is now less a startled body and more a practiced one. This matters. Monastic life depended on habit in the deepest sense. Not just the clothes a monk wore, but the trained set of small actions that carried him through the day. Reach for this, fold that, tie this, move aside here, stand there. The rule told him the broad shape of life. Repetition taught his hands the rest. His clothing is simple, but simple does not mean careless. A Benedictine monk in 12th century England would wear wool. Wool close to the skin or wool over linen, depending on means, season, and local custom. He would not dress to display himself. He would dress to cover the body, bear the cold, and suit the life. The cowl, the long outer garment, belonged to the monk's public shape. His belt, hose, shoes or sandals, and underclothes belonged to the less noble truth that bodies need practical help. Lanfranc's constitutions cared about clothing, because monasteries were always trying to keep order from tipping either into softness or into needless neglect. A monk was not meant to preen. He was also not meant to fall apart. In the dark or near dark, dressing becomes mostly touch. A sleeve found by memory, a fold shaken out, a belt pulled snug, a foot pushed into something stiff with yesterday's use. No mirror waits to flatter him. No private chest holds a secret little wardrobe of moods. He has what he has. And in a way, that makes the morning easier. Choice is tiring. The medieval monk had many burdens. A surplus of wardrobe questions was not one of them. Around him, the sleeping room is no longer asleep. Some men move briskly, some do not. A younger novice may still have the jumpy wish to do everything right and do it fast. An older monk may move more slowly, not from laziness, but because his joints have started to make their own comments on the rule. Someone clears his throat. Someone stifles a yawn. someone has already mastered the look of being awake without truly being so. Monastic life, like all shared life, had its small experts. We do not know every tiny detail of a Canterbury monk's dawn with the sort of neat certainty modern people sometimes want. Historians still have to stitch this world together from rules, customaries, plans, building remains, chronicles, and what later practice helps explain. But the broad pattern is firm. This was a communal waking, a disciplined waking, and a bodily waking. Medieval holiness did not float above the flesh. It had to get dressed in it. Then comes water, not a hot bath, not a cheerful splash in a bright modern basin, just water, useful and plain. At Canterbury, the Priory had a notable piped water and drainage system in the 12th century, preserved in the plan associated with the Edwine Psalter and Prior Wybert. That does not mean every monk enjoyed comfort as we would define it, but it does mean water could be brought where it was needed in a more planned way than many people imagine when they picture the Middle Ages. A basin, a cloth, a rinse for the face, maybe the hands too, maybe the mouth, enough to wake the skin and make a man feel more fit to stand in company. This is not the modern day beginning with soaps, scents, and a mirror lit like a stage. It is a practical setting in order. Medieval monks were not committed to filth as a spiritual principle. They were committed to restraint, clean enough to live, pray, eat, work, and keep the house decent. Not pampered, not polished, just maintained. That word matters here. Maintained. A monastery maintained souls, books, roofs, drains, and bodies, all with the same stern patience. None of them could be ignored for long. If a man was ill, the infirmary existed for him. If he was not ill, the day still expected him to wash enough, dress enough, and present himself in order. Lanfranc's constitutions make clear that sickness could call for exceptions, which tells us, in its own quiet way, that the ordinary rule was not built for ease. A healthy monk was expected to keep moving with the day. There may have been combs. That is one of those small facts that feels almost too human once you picture it. Hair needed taming. Beards, where worn, needed care of some kind. Tonsures had to be kept. A monk did not become less made of hair because he had taken vows. The body kept growing, itching, tangling, tiring, and needing ordinary management. There is something faintly comforting in that. However high the ideals, mourning still meant getting one's person into some sort of order. And then there is the light. At first, it is not much, just enough to show edges, the end of a bench, the line of a doorway, the pale breath of air where a shutter does not fully keep out the season. Then slowly, the priory begins to return from darkness. The cloister walk is no longer a tunnel, but a shape. The church no longer seems to float in shadow, but settles back into stone. The roofs beyond the garth gather damp light. A crow or rook or some other early and slightly offended bird begins to say what it thinks of the whole arrangement. This is the hour when a place stops being abstract. At night, a monastery is mostly bell, stare, cold, and chant. In the morning, it becomes rooms again. The chapter house waits. The refectory waits. The kitchens are coming alive. Somewhere water runs through pipe or channel. Somewhere a servant attached to the priory has started work on terms different from the monk's own. Somewhere bread is already a thought in someone's hands. The world is broadening. And with that broadening comes another part of the morning rhythm. Chapter. In a Benedictine house, the Chapter House was one of the places where communal life became plain. The rule might be read there, faults might be confessed there, instructions might be given. The room itself was a kind of daily reminder that a monk did not belong only to himself. His failures were not wholly private. His duties were not self-chosen each morning according to mood. The day had a shape before he entered it. That can sound severe to modern ears, and of course it was. But it also gave a strange sort of freedom. Not freedom to do whatever one pleased, nearly the opposite. Freedom from deciding the whole meaning of the day from scratch. The hour had already been named. The place had already been built. The custom had already been handed down. A monk still had temptations, moods, resentments, sleepiness, vanity, irritation, boredom. He was still a person. But the monastery did not ask him to invent the morning. It handed him one. If nights like these from the past help you drift off, stay a while. Pause. Now, the morning keeps moving. Let's imagine one monk among the rest. Not a saint in stained glass, not a villain with a secret, just one ordinary brother of Christ Church, Canterbury. He has left the daughter. He has rinsed his face in cold water. He has settled his clothes. He has stepped through the cloister with other men who know this path so well. They could probably find it half asleep, because often they do. He is not cheerful. He is not tragic. He is simply in the day now. He knows, without needing to think hard, where his feet go next. That learned ease is one of the great unnoticed facts of monastic life. Buildings taught behavior. At Canterbury, the arrangement of church, cloister, dormitory, latrine block, and refectory did not merely house the monks, it trained them. The short route from daughter to church made the night office possible. The covered cloister made constant passage possible in bad weather. The placing of refectory and chapter house gave meals, and discipline fixed homes in the pattern. The priory plan is useful for exactly this reason. It lets us see routine made stone. A younger monk might still notice everything. The damp smell near one stair. The way one older brother always walks with a hand on the wall in winter. The scrape of a sandal that needs mending. The little bloom of breath in the cold. The sound of pages somewhere turned by someone already more awake than seems fair. An older monk would notice less because he knew more. Not less in truth, less in surprise. He had lived this morning before, hundreds of times, thousands perhaps. That is the strange thing about monasteries. Their drama is built from repetition. Here a named man helps us. Gervaso Canterbury was not every monk, but he was one real monk of Christ Church, later a sacristan and a chronicler. Britannica notes that he served as sacristan of the monastery for several years in the 1190s and began compiling his chronica around 1188. That means one of the men living inside this ordered place was also observing, remembering, and writing. It is pleasant to imagine him, not as a grand historian, but as a man who also knew cold mornings, choir, routine, and the effort of getting fully awake before the day had already moved on. The sacristan's world, after all, was not made of ideas alone. Candles had to exist. Books had to be there. Things had to be in their proper place. The church does not run on symbolism. It runs on someone remembering where the keys are. That is one of the gentler jokes hidden inside monastic history. However lofty the prayers, someone still had to manage the practical side of dawn. A lamp does not trim itself. A door does not open from pure devotion. Somewhere some monk was already doing the quiet, boring work that let the holy work look serene. Mourning also sharpens the social world of the monastery. By this point, ranks and roles become easier to feel. The novice watches. The senior monk expects. The officer of the house has duties before others are fully alert. The infirm monk may move differently, or perhaps remain apart if illness allows him relief. The porter may already have one ear turned toward the outer world. The cellarer may already be thinking about stores, ale, bread, fish, fuel, and all the endless things that do not become less urgent because the monks have been singing psalms since the middle of the night. Benedict's rule spends real care on offices such as the cellarer, which tells us something simple and deep. Monasteries survived on management as much as on zeal. And still, even under all that order, the morning keeps its small personal moments. A man flexes his stiff hands before work. Another warms them briefly in his sleeves. Someone feels the scrape of wool at the neck and wishes for half a breath that he had been born a cat on a warm wall instead of a monk in Kent. Then the wish passes. The hour moves on. That is the emotional grain of this act. Not grand suffering, not grand peace. Just the plain effort of beginning. The more closely we look, the more familiar it becomes. Modern people wake to alarm tones and glowing screens. Medieval monks woke to bells and stone corridors. But the inward motion is not wholly different. The mind rises slowly. The body complains a little. The hands do what they know before the heart has quite agreed. The world comes into focus. A face is washed, clothes are settled. The day, whether desired or not, begins. And in a Benedictine monastery, that beginning was never only personal. It belonged to the house. The bell had called many men. The paths held many feet. The basins served many hands. The chapter would gather many voices or many silences. This was not one private mourning, but a common one, shared by brothers whose lives had been braided together by vows, walls, and time. Soon, prayer gives way to labor more fully. Pens will move, pots will steam, doors will open, tasks will repeat. The first real business of daylight is almost here, and once the cold water has done its work and the priory stands clear in the grey of morning, the day will no longer belong to waking. It will belong to work. By now the day has settled into its true shape. The shock of waking is gone. The bells have already had their say. The cold is still there, of course. It does not vanish out of kindness, but the monk is moving inside it now, and movement helps. Hands begin to do what hands have done many times before. A door is opened, a tool is lifted, a page is turned, a sack is shifted. The monastery, which in the night felt made mostly of darkened prayer, begins to show its other nature. It is a place of work, not loud work most of it, not hurried in the way a market town might hurry, but steady, measured, returning. A Benedictine house did not run on feeling. It ran on repeated tasks, done by men who often did not get much praise for doing them. That was partly the point. Work was not there to build a personal name. It was there because the life required it. Meals had to appear. Floors had to be swept. Books had to be kept safe. The church had to be ready for the next office. Guests had to be received. The sick had to be tended. Bread did not bake itself merely because the priory was holy. So let's slow down and look around. In one part of the house, a monk is bent over a book. In another, someone is checking stores. In another, a servant attached to the priory is hauling something heavy and wishing it were less heavy. Near the church, a sacrist or his helper is making sure that what is needed for worship will be where it ought to be, when it ought to be there. Lamps, candles, vestments, books, vessels, all the objects that let prayer happen without confusion. Devotion may rise from the soul, but a candle still needs wax, a wick, and a person who remembered to bring it. This is one reason Gervase of Canterbury matters so much. He was not only a chronicler, he also served as sacristan at Christ Church. That means he knew the practical side of sacred life. He knew that great liturgy rested on small preparation. He knew that someone had to notice what was missing before everyone else noticed it too. A medieval monastery had many such men. Gervase happens to have left a name. Most did not. And then there was the cellarer. This is one of the best monastic job titles because it sounds faintly grand until you remember what it means. The cellarer was the officer who handled stores and supplies, food, drink, cloth, tools, fuel, all the plain things that stood between a monastery and discomfort, or between discomfort and disaster. St. Benedict says the cellarer should be wise, steady, not proud, not wasteful, and not given to upsetting the brethren. It is a lovely little glimpse of reality. If a monk was put in charge of everyone's food and goods, he clearly had many chances to become a trial to others. So picture him. He is not floating through the cloister in spiritual mist. He is counting. He is checking. He is trying to make sure the priory has enough ale, enough bread grain, enough dried goods, enough fuel, enough fish, and the right days, enough everything. He has to think ahead. He has to manage need, scarcity, timing, and the mild, endless drama of communal life. The holy life, it turns out, still requires inventory. Elsewhere, work grows quieter. A monk copies text. Not every monk spent his day in a scriptorium. It is best not to imagine rows of monks doing nothing but writing beautiful books all day. But some did copy, correct, gloss, bind, and care for manuscripts, and Canterbury was one of the great bookmaking centres of medieval England. Here the work becomes almost invisible in its slowness. A page laid flat, ink prepared, a knife for scraping mistakes, a careful hand, then line after line, letter after letter. The sort of labour that makes the hours pass without seeming to move. This is where Edwine drifts into view. The Edwine Psalter is tied to Canterbury, and those scholars still debate the exact shape of Edwine's part in it. His name gives us a helpful human point inside the world of monastic books. Whether he was scribe, overseer, or something more tangled, he belongs to that patient labour of parchment, ink, and trained eyes. The pages did not appear by magic. They appeared because someone sat down and kept going. Scrape, dip, write, pause, scrape again, shift the wrist, read back the line, go on. It is almost hypnotic, and perhaps that is fitting, because much of monastic work had that feel. The garden too, the kitchen too, the laundry, the sweeping, the repair of clothing, the carrying of water, the mending of tools. Most labour in the priory was not dramatic. It was repetitive by design. If it went well, it barely called attention to itself. Success often looked like nothing surprising happening. That quiet success mattered. Imagine the kitchen for a moment, not as a warm, painted scene in a pretty history book, but as a place of heat, steam, soot, and timing. Pottage must not burn. Bread has to be watched. Fish has to be handled properly. Bowls and knives and ladles have to be where hands can find them. Someone is lifting a lid. Someone is blowing at a coal. Someone is trying to keep the whole business moving without much fuss. The meal later will seem calm in the refectory. It will not have begun calmly here. Then the gardens. Monasteries are often remembered for their herb plots, and rightly so. Herbs mattered for food and for simple remedies. But gardens were not only tidy little corners of rosemary and sage for gentle souls to admire. They were working ground. Food, flavor, medicine, and habit all met there. Beds had to be tended. Weeds had to be pulled. Seasons had to be watched. A monastery might pray by the clock, but it still ate by the weather. And outside the core of the cloister proper, other work kept going. There were lay servants in many houses, hired labor, tenants somewhere beyond the immediate precinct, carting, digging, building, hauling, repairing. A large priory did not exist by monkish hands alone. This matters because life in a monastery was never just the life of choir monks. It included a wider ring of workers whose names are even harder to recover, though their labor is everywhere once you know to look for it. A wall does not mend itself. A load of firewood does not arrive through contemplation. The monk, though, experiences this world in his own particular way. His work is fitted between offices. Prayer, work, prayer again. That rhythm breaks labor into pieces. It keeps no task from becoming the whole day, at least not in theory. A man might be carrying grain in the morning and chanting later. He might be reading at 1 hour and helping in some practical duty at another. The alternation matters. Benedict did not imagine a monastery as a place of endless private thought. He imagined a life where handwork, sacred reading, obedience, and common worship answered one another like bells across courtyard. That can make the day seem broken up. It can also make it feel merciful. A hard task ends. A psalm begins. A long office ends. Hands return to labor. No single state lasts forever. Not weariness, not stillness, not hunger, not even irritation with the brother 2 places down, who somehow always sets things down a little too hard. And yes, irritation belonged here too. Shared work has always had its small frictions. One man is slow. One is brisk to the point of annoyance. One is careful. One is careless. One thinks he is being helpful when he is chiefly being present. Medieval monks did not leave behind all human awkwardness when they took vows. They simply had to practice it under stricter conditions. There is something almost tender in that. Even inside a life aimed at God, someone still had to deal with a fellow who stacked things badly. The work also taught rank without needing speeches. A novice would learn by watching, not only how to do a task, but how to carry himself in doing it. When to speak, when not to. How to hand over a tool. How to move in a kitchen without blocking the fire. How to hold a book with clean hands. How to wait. How to endure small boredom without making it everyone else's problem. Much of monastic education was not grand instruction. It was close imitation. A younger man watched an older one and slowly became less clumsy. That slow lessening of clumsiness may be one of the truest marks of the life. Not perfection, not ecstasy, just practice steadiness. The hand that no longer spills, the foot that finds the stair in low light, the voice that enters the chant at the right moment, the body that has learned when to bow, when to stand, when to lift, when to stop. And work could be hard on the body in ways no vow could smooth over. A back aches whether one is holy or not. Ink stains fingers, Smoke catches in the throat. Cold numbs the hands. A sack of grain remains a sack of grain. In a place like Canterbury, with its fine church and long memory, it would be easy to think only of manuscripts and ceremony. But behind every liturgy stood laundry, hauling, sweeping, cooking, chopping, mending, cleaning, and carrying. Behind every smooth hour stood rough work done earlier by someone else. There is a kind of peace in that truth. A monastery was not peaceful because nothing happened. It was peaceful when it was, because so many necessary things kept happening in order. Work made order visible. A bench in place, a lamp trimmed, a robe mended, a page copied, a meal ready, a gate watched, a sick man tended, a floor cleared for the next set of feet. By late morning, the first freshness of dawn has worn off. The monk is fully inside the day now. He has done things already, several things likely. The body has warmed a little from use. The mind has narrowed to the next task, and then the next. This is often how long human labor feels when seen honestly. Not heroic, not miserable every second, just ongoing. A sequence of motions that eventually becomes the day itself. And because the monastery keeps time so carefully, work always carries within it the knowledge that it will pause. Another office will come, another bell, another gathering. No one task gets the last word. That belongs to the rhythm of the house. Soon enough, though, another need begins to rise. Not spiritual this time, plain, steady, familiar, hunger. After prayer, after motion, after work with hand and back and eye, the thought of food begins to gather at the edge of the mind. Bread, ale, a hot dish perhaps, the refectory benches, the relief of sitting down. And so, as the tasks keep repeating and the monastery hums with its modest, necessary labor, the day bends almost without anyone saying so toward the table. By the time the meal comes, the monk is ready for it in a very plain way. Not with greed, at least not if things are going well. Not with delight, not always. But with the deep, steady readiness that comes after cold air, prayer, and work. The body has begun to ask for something warm, something filling, something that does not need much thought. And so, the house gathers at the table. Not a table in the way we might picture our own. Not a round wooden board with a family leaning in to chat. This is the refectory, long, ordered, shared. A room shaped for eating together without turning the meal into a social event. Benches, boards, bowls, bread, cups, men taking their places as they have many times before. This is one of the easiest places to feel close to the past, because however different the monastery was from modern life, hunger still arrived on time. A monk's belly did not care much for theology by the middle of the day. It wanted bread, it wanted pottage, it wanted something with substance. And the rule of St. Benedict, strict though it could be, was not blind to this. Benedict allowed for measured food and drink, enough to sustain the body without turning the meal into a feast. The point was not misery. The point was restraint. The distinction matters. Medieval monastic life was hard, but it was not designed as a hunger contest. A monk was expected to live simply, not vanish. Benedict allows 2 cooked dishes for the daily meal, with a third added when fruit or fresh vegetables can be had. He also sets out a daily ration of bread, not luxury, not abundance, but enough to keep a man at his tasks if the house was being run properly. So what might that look like in 12th century England, in a place like Canterbury? Start with bread. Bread was not a side thought. It was the ground under the meal, darker or lighter depending on means, grain and season, cut or torn, held in the hand, used to fill the belly and steady the day. A monk would know bread the way a sailor knows rope, not as an occasional pleasure, but as part of the shape of living. Then pottage. This is one of those old words that sounds quaint until you remember how useful it was. A pot on the fire. Grains, peas, beans, onions, leeks, herbs. Sometimes thicker, sometimes thinner, sometimes better, sometimes much less so. It changed with season, stores, fasting rules, and the skill of whoever had charge of the cooking. It was warm. It was practical. It was not trying to impress anyone. And then fish, often enough. For monks, meat from four-footed animals was often restricted, especially for the healthy in the main body of the house. Fish, though, was another matter. It mattered a great deal. In England, and especially in a large house that knew how to provision itself, fish could turn up in many forms. Fresh fish when possible, salt fish when needed, eels, river fish, sea fish brought inland. Fish ponds mattered for a reason. They were not decorative. They were supper waiting its turn. Canterbury had fish ponds, and that detail helps the whole meal feel more real. Somewhere within the Priory's world, living food moved through water while monks copied books, prayed the offices, and tried not to think too fondly about dinner before its hour. A monastery planned ahead. Hunger came every day. So did fasting. So did Friday. So did Lent. A wise house kept fish. Vegetables mattered too. Beans, peas, leeks, cabbage, onions, herbs from the garden. Not all at once, not always in comfort. But these were the kinds of things that made up the real body of a meal. Medieval food is often flattened into either constant feasting or endless misery. Most people, monks very much included, lived somewhere less dramatic. They ate what could be grown, stored, boiled, baked, dried, salted, and served without fuss. And then there was ale. In an English monastery, ale belonged to daily life the way water did, though not in quite the same way. Water could be clean or not, near or not, convenient or not. Ale was nourishment as well as drink. Small ale, weak by modern standards, would have been familiar and useful. Benedict famously wrote of wine because he was not writing in England. But English monastic life had to live in English conditions, and ale had a natural place in that world. So imagine the table now. Bowls set down, bread passed, cups filled, steam rising faintly. A brother sitting carefully because the bench is hard. Another already looking less ghostly than he did at Matins. The meal begins, but it does not begin with chatter. This is one of the strange comforts of the monastic table. The room is communal, yet not noisy in the usual way. In many Benedictine houses, a text would be read aloud during meals while the others ate in silence. So the refectory held two kinds of feeding at once: bread for the body, words for the mind, or at least words for the ears. Whether every hungry monk felt equally nourished by the reading is another matter. A tired man with a bowl in front of him may be forgiven for focusing on the bowl. Still, the reader's voice would have shaped the room. Steady, measured, sometimes useful, sometimes perhaps harder to follow than the steam rising from the dish. The benches creak, spoons tap, bread tears. Someone coughs and tries not to make too much of it. The words continue. The meal goes on. There is a calm in that picture. Not because the food was perfect, not because everyone was secretly having the best time of his life, but because the form is so settled. Sit here, eat this, listen. Do not talk more than needed. Let the room hold you for a little while. After labor, that alone can feel like mercy. A monk would also know the meaning of fast days very well. Not every meal was alike. The church calendar reached all the way to the table. Feast and fast, fish and no meat, smaller portions, different hours, changed expectations. Time itself had flavor. One season filled the bowl one way, another thinned it. Lent felt different from Easter. Winter stores did not look like late summer plenty. The refectory taught the year as surely as the cloister taught the day. And rank touched the table too, though perhaps more quietly than elsewhere. The prior did not sit as just another hungry man. Seniority mattered. Office mattered. The sick might eat apart or differently in the infirmary. Guests, too, could alter the pattern. A large monastery had to make room now and then for hospitality as well as routine. But for the ordinary monk, the beauty of the meal was often its sameness. One more fixed point in a life made of fixed points. This is also where the body and the soul stop pretending to be strangers. A monk might spend the morning praying psalms about heaven. Then, at table, he reached for bread like anyone else. There is no shame in that. In fact, the whole Benedictine system depends on admitting it. Men need food. They need warmth. They need rest. The rule does not deny these things. It tries to give them their proper measure. Not too much, not too little. Enough for the work of the day and the keeping of the life. Enough. That may be the word that rules the whole table. Enough bread, enough pottage, enough ale, enough time to eat, enough quiet to settle the mind, enough order that the meal does not tip into noise or greed, not plenty in the grand sense, just enough. And sometimes, enough is deeply comforting. A bowl warms the hands, steam touches the face. The first mouthful is plain, soft and welcome. Bread steadies the belly. For a little while nothing is required but eating, listening, sitting upright, and not reaching too quickly for more than your share. There are worse ways to spend a noon. If you're still with me, a quiet like helps others find this too. There is dry humor hidden here, if you look for it gently. The monastery could regulate prayer, clothing, silence, sleep, reading, correction, and drink with impressive care. Yet somewhere in every refectory, at some point, there was surely one monk waiting a bit too eagerly for the bread basket to come his way. Holiness did not cancel appetite. It simply taught it to stand in line. The men themselves would have known that. Not as a grand moral insight, just as daily fact. The brother next to you sings badly at dawn, walks too slowly in the cloister, and now takes an extra large piece of bread, while looking as innocent as a lamb. Such things belong to communal life in every century. Meals also marked relief. Not complete relief. The day still had more in it. There would be more work, more offices, more standing, more keeping of time. But the table broke the labor. It gave the body a small harbor. That matters more than it may seem. A life becomes bearable not only through high purpose, but through repeated places of rest. The refectory was one of them. And there were textures here too. The scrape of a spoon on wood, the roughness of crust, the softness inside the loaf, the faint sharpness of onion, the green bite of an herb, a broth too thin on one day, a thicker one on another, a fishbone to be managed without fuss, the warmth of ale, the bench beneath tired legs, a shaft of light from a high window falling across a table scarred by years of other meals, other hands, other brothers now gone. By now, the Priory is well inside the day. The first cold shock of morning has passed. Work has made the body real. Food has made it human again. The monk is not a figure in a manuscript. He is a person with a bowl, with hunger, with habits, with a seat among others. That is one of the most useful things a table can show us. It cuts through the distance. And yet the refectory also reminds us how unlike our own meals this was. No easy conversation, no picking a favorite dish, no second life elsewhere while the mind wanders. The table is shared discipline, shared need, shared provision. A room where men eat together because they live together and live together because they have vowed to stay. Soon the bowls will empty, the reading will end, benches will shift, hands will wipe crumbs, the room will loosen, then empty. And the monk, who for a short while has been mostly a body at rest, will have to carry that body onward again. Because even after bread and pottage and the relief of sitting still, the day does not stop asking things of flesh. It asks about cold, about ache, about cleanliness, about sickness, about sleep, about how a man lives inside his own skin when the rule has already claimed the hours. That is where the day turns next, from the table to the body. After the meal, the monk still carries the day inside his flesh. That never stops being true. He may have prayed for hours. He may have listened in silence. He may have eaten in order and risen in order and walked where the house told him to walk. But under all of that, he is still a body, warm for a while, then cold again, fed, then hungry later, washed a little, then dirty again, strong on one day, stiff on another. A monastery could order time. It could not cancel the body. That is one of the gentlest truths in the whole life. Medieval monks were not floating minds in wool robes. They had knees. They had bellies. They had skin that itched under rough cloth. They had backs that ached in cold weather. They had feet that knew every hard stair in the dark. The rule of St. Benedict never forgets this for long. In fact, one of its most humane chapters says, very plainly, that care of the sick must come before almost everything else, and that the sick are to be served as though they were Christ himself. That line matters because it tells us what kind of problem sickness was. Not rare, not shocking, expected. A monastery had to plan for illness the way it planned for bread, so there was an infirmary, or at the very least, a set-apart place for sick brothers, just as Benedict says there should be. A large priory like Christ Church, Canterbury, also had the advantage of a notable 12th century water system linked with Prior Wybert's plan, which fed a complex of conventual buildings and helped support washing, kitchens and care. That did not make the place modern, but it did make it practical in ways that are easy to miss when people imagine the Middle Ages as one long, muddy blur. So let's stay with the body a little longer. Start with washing, not bathing in the modern sense, not soap, steam and a bright tiled room. Just the steady, plain management of skin, hands, face and hair. Enough to remain decent, enough to live in close quarters with many other people without becoming unbearable. Enough sometimes to wake a man more firmly than prayer had managed to do. Monastic cleanliness was practical before it was pleasant. A basin, a cloth, cold water, a rinse, that sort of thing. And then, less often, baths. This is one of those details people often get wrong in both directions. Medieval monks were not secretly spa enthusiasts, but neither were they sworn enemies of water. Benedict says that baths should be offered to the sick whenever useful, though the healthy, especially the young, were to receive them less readily. He also says that very weak sick brothers may be given meat to recover their strength, even though healthy monks were usually expected to abstain from it. That is a striking little window into monastic life. The rule bends for weakness. It does not pretend weakness is failure. So a monk who was ill might be treated quite differently from one who was well. He might sleep apart. He might eat apart. He might bathe. He might be excused from some duties. He might even be given food that would not appear in the ordinary refectory. That mattered. It meant the monastery had a second mode. Not only discipline, but care. Not only rule, but allowance. There is something almost moving in that. A hard life makes room for softness. Only in certain places. Only when needed. But still, it makes room. We should not make that softer than it was. Sickness in the 12th century was still frightening. Pain was real. Infections were real. Long weakness was real. Old age was hard. A monastery could soothe some things and do very little about others. But it had at least one great advantage over many lay households. It was organized. There were attendants. There was routine. There was a place for the sick to go. Benedict is very clear that they should not be neglected. Now think about sleep. Not the dreamy idea of sleep, the real kind, broken sleep, cold sleep, shared sleep. Sleep, interrupted by matins. This may be one of the strangest bodily demands of the whole monastic life. The body wants its rest in one lump. The monastery does not always allow that. Night is cut, sleep is divided. The monk learns over years to live in pieces. Rest, rise, chant, rest again perhaps, then rise to the day. That kind of life teaches the body odd lessons. Some men likely got used to it. Some perhaps never fully did. And then there is wool. Wool at the neck, wool at the wrist, wool when damp, wool when cold, wool when it scratches a little and you must pretend not to notice because everyone else is also a little uncomfortable and no one is handing out silk. Clothing in a monastery was meant to be enough, not delightful. Lanfranc's customs, like Benedict's rule, were interested in keeping things ordered, measured, and suitable. Not fussy, not vain, just workable. That is a very bodily word. Workable. Hair needed work too. So did the beard, where it was worn. And the tonsure, the shaved crown that marked the clerical life, did not maintain itself from pure holiness. Someone had to cut it. Someone had to keep it tidy enough that a monk still looked like part of the house and not like a wandering hedge. The medieval monastery had many spiritual aims, but one of its quieter daily achievements was simply keeping a large number of men more or less in shape for communal life. The nose would have had its say too. That is only fair to admit. Many men, shared rooms, wool, work, latrines, kitchens, drains, smoke, mud in bad weather. However good Canterbury's water system was, and it was notably advanced for its day, bodily life inside the priory was never scentless. It was controlled, not erased. A monastery asked people to endure one another in ways modern privacy rarely does. That endurance had a smell to it. Then there is pain, not dramatic pain, not the kind later writers like to turn into spectacle. Just ordinary pain. A split finger from work, a cough that lingers, teeth that trouble a man on and off, cold settling into the joints, a belly turned by bad food or too much fasting, a headache in choir, a sore knee on stone. That was the common weather of the body, and because the monastery was built around repeated acts, even small pain could become part of the rhythm. A man learns the office with an aching back. He walks the cloister with a stiff ankle. He stands through reading with tired eyes. It would be wrong to call that noble every time. Often it was probably just tedious. That is part of what makes it real. The monk does not always suffer in a grand pose. Often he simply continues. He adjusts the way he sits. He rubs warmth into his hands. He shifts his weight from one foot to the other. He learns which stair is worst in winter. He keeps going because the bell has rung and because everyone else is also keeping going. This is where the warming house comes back into view. In many monasteries, the warming house was one of the very few places where a regular fire might be kept for the community. That means warmth itself became a kind of rationed comfort. A monk whose hands had gone nearly wooden from cold could stand there for a short while and feel himself return. Not luxuriate, just return. You can picture it easily enough. Palms turned toward the heat, sleeves smelling faintly of smoke, a brief loosening in the shoulders, then back into the day. The body also had to be disciplined in more awkward ways. Silence for one. It is easy to think of silence as a spiritual matter alone. But silence is bodily too. It lives in the mouth and throat. It changes how people move around one another. It makes a man ask for things with his hands instead of his voice. It makes the refectory feel different. It makes a cough louder than it would otherwise seem. English heritage notes, quite sensibly, that monastic silence did not mean the absence of sound. It meant sound was shaped, limited, and given places. That shaping is felt in the body. You hold yourself differently in a quiet house. And there were the old monks. We should make room for them here. A monastery was not only a place of young zeal. If a man lived long enough, he grew old under the rule. That means old age itself became monastic. Slower steps, worse sleep, colder hands, longer recovery from small illnesses, a face more lined in the choir stalls. Benedict's concern for the weak was not abstract. It belonged to the very structure of such a life because every vigorous novice was, if he stayed, simply a future old monk, climbing the same stairs more carefully. That may be one of the more tender facts in the whole story. The monastery trained men together. Then it watched them wear down together. Not all at once, slowly, one winter at a time. A named man can help us here, even if only lightly. Lanfranc matters again, not because he personally warmed every monk's hands or checked every basin, but because the customs linked with him helped shape how an English Benedictine house managed bodies in practice. Sickness, attendance, order, and the handling of daily life at Canterbury after the Norman refounding. And Prior Wybert matters because his waterworks plan reminds us that bodily maintenance was built into the priory stone and pipe, not tacked on as an afterthought. It is tempting to think that the spiritual life begins where the body ends. Medieval monks would likely have disagreed. The spiritual life began in the body's company, in cold, in hunger, in weariness, in the nuisance of rough cloth, in the relief of warm food, in the weakness of sickness, in the mercy of being cared for when weak. The monk did not pray from somewhere outside his flesh. He prayed from inside it. That is why this act matters. Without it, the monastery turns into a symbol. With it, the place becomes human again. The bowl at dinner mattered because the belly mattered. The stairs at Matins mattered because the knees mattered. The infirmary mattered because bodies fail. The bath, rare though it might be, mattered because skin and bone do not become less real under vows. And once you see that clearly, the monks begin to feel less remote. They were stranger than us in some ways, more ruled, more communal, less private, but not less bodily, not at all. By now, the day has worn into afternoon. The monk's flesh has been fed, managed, warmed a little, tested a little, and asked for patience more than once. Yet the body is never the whole story in a monastery. No one lives long in such a place without leaning on other people. Someone brings food, someone tends the sick, someone makes room on a bench, someone slows down for an older brother. And so, from the plain fact of the body, the day turns almost naturally toward something softer, toward the ties that made the hard life. By afternoon, the monastery feels smaller. Not in truth. The walls have not moved. The church is still large. The cloister still opens its square of air to the sky. The kitchens still have their smoke, the chapter house its order, the infirmary its quiet care. But after a day of moving through the same paths, seeing the same sleeves, hearing the same voices in chant, the human closeness of the place becomes harder to miss. A monk did not live alone. That may seem obvious, but it is worth sitting with. He slept near others, prayed near others, ate near others, worked near others, aged near others. Even his silence was shared. The monastery was full of men trying in different degrees and with different tempers to live one life together. That is not a small thing. It is hard enough for a family, hard enough for a ship, hard enough for any house. A Benedictine priory tried to do it for decades at a time, under vows, with cold stares and little privacy. So this act is not about romance, not in the modern sense. It is about nearness, dependence, the slow making of trust, the small forms of kindness that keep a strict life from turning to stone. Saint Benedict understood this well. His rule is often remembered for obedience and silence, but it is full of concern for how people are to bear with one another. The strong are to care for the weak. The cellarer is told not to upset the brothers. The sick are to be treated with special care. The old and the young are to receive consideration. Even the correctional faults is meant to keep the community whole. It is a practical, almost domestic kind of wisdom. Holiness in a monastery had to make room for patience. That means friendship existed here, even if it did not always speak its name aloud. A monk might not pour out his feelings as a modern person might want. He might not have much time or custom for soft speeches, but affection has many languages. One man leaves a warmer place by the fire for another. One older brother waits a moment on the stair. One novice is shown, without mockery, how to hold a book properly, how to fold a garment, how to move through choir without bumping a bench or losing his place. Such things matter. They are the daily grammar of care. Think of a novice. He enters young, perhaps not a child, though sometimes very young boys were given to the monastic life. Perhaps an adolescent, perhaps older. However old he is, he enters as someone who does not yet know the house in his bones. That is a vulnerable state. The bells are unfamiliar. The dark route to church is unfamiliar. The customs of silence, gesture, dress, posture, and timing are unfamiliar. He will need correction, certainly, but he will also need example. Someone has to show him how to belong. And monasteries were full of example. Not always shining example. Sometimes merely adequate example. Still, that is how most people learn. Not from ideals alone, but from the person standing nearest. This monk speaks less. That one bows a little sooner. Another keeps his things in better order. One elder brother has a voice that makes the psalms easier to follow. Another has a face that says he has seen half the priory make the same mistake before and is too tired to be surprised by it now. A novice would learn from all of them, whether he meant to or not. The bonds in a monastery were also shaped by office. The prior governed, the cellarer provided, the infirmarian cared for the sick, the sacrist prepared the church. These were not merely job titles. They created lines of reliance. If the cellarer did his work poorly, other men felt it in their stomachs. If the infirmarian did his poorly, they felt it in pain. If the sacrist failed, the church itself faltered in small, embarrassing ways. Communal life turns private virtue into public consequence very quickly. That is one reason monasteries took office seriously. A man like Gervase of Canterbury helps us again here. Not because we know all his friendships, we do not, but because we know he lived, worked and wrote within Christchurch Priory for years. He served as sacristan. He was part of a house that required memory, cooperation and long endurance. He was not a lone genius in a tower. He was a monk among monks. Even his writing came out of shared life. He observed events that mattered to the whole community, not just to himself. There is something gentle in that thought. A name survives because a house held it long enough. And around that one named man, hundreds of unnamed ones moved through the same courts, the same offices, the same winters, the same feast days. Their friendships did not make the chronicles. Their small patience rarely made the page. Yet without it, no monastery would have lasted a year. Because let us be honest, living closely with other people is tiring. Even good people, especially good people sometimes, if they have strong ideas about proper conduct and no escape from one another. The Benedictine life could produce peace, but it did not do so by removing friction. It did so by giving friction rules. You are annoyed by the brother who coughs during reading. There are ways to handle that. You are tired of the novice who blunders. There are ways to handle that. You think the man beside you has somehow made more noise with one bench than seems physically possible. There are ways to handle that too, though perhaps not always cheerful ones. The point is not that monks were above irritation. The point is that they had to stay. That changes everything. In many parts of life, strain leads to distance. In a monastery, strain still leads to the next office, the next meal, the next shared stare in the dark. So patience is no longer a pretty virtue. It becomes structure. And then there is care in illness. This may be the clearest form of monastic tenderness. When a brother was sick, others had to serve him. Benedict is explicit about this. The sick are to be cared for before all else. That tells us not only about values, but about feeling. You do not write a rule like that unless you know that care can be neglected when life gets busy, and unless you want the community to remember that weakness changes what is owed. A sick monk was not simply a failed worker. He was a brother in need. So picture the infirmary in the soft, later light of the day. A man lies apart from the mainstream of the house. He hears the bells still, but from a distance. Someone brings him food. Someone checks on him. Someone speaks more gently than the chapter house would. A cup is set down. A blanket is adjusted. The door closes softly. That is a form of love, even if no one calls it that. The medieval monastery had its harshness. It also had this: a world where one tired man made room for another. A world where care could be built into rule so firmly that neglect itself became a breach of order. Old age deepened these bonds further. A man who had lived under the rule for 40 years was not simply another body in choir. He was memory made visible. Younger monks would know his habits, his slowness, his place in the house. They would know when to wait for him, when to help without embarrassing him, when to leave him to his dignity. The old monk, in turn, carried a kind of authority that no office could quite replace. He had outlasted many winters. He had heard many novices sing too fast. He had buried friends. He had seen the priory change by inches. This too is a bond, not bright, not sentimental, just long. And what of the ties beyond the cloister? A monk had left his birth family, yes. In theory, he had died to the world. In practice, the monastery was never fully sealed. Families brought boys as oblates or novices. Patrons gave gifts. Guests arrived. Alms were distributed. Pilgrims came and went. Letters might pass. News certainly did. The gate was a real threshold, but it was not the edge of human feeling. The priory touched the town and the wider world all the time. That means a monk's bonds were not only inward, they were layered. At Canterbury, this mattered especially because Christ Church Priory stood inside one of the most important religious centres in England. Even before Thomas Becket's cult transformed the city later in the century, Canterbury was no forgotten corner. Monks there lived in contact with archbishops, clerks, visitors, craftsmen, servants, and townspeople. Their common life was enclosed, but never empty of outside ties. Still, the heart of the matter remained the daily brotherhood of the house. The man beside you in choir, the man ahead of you on the stair, the man across from you at table, the one whose cough you know, the one whose tread you can pick out in the cloister, the one who reads too flatly in refectory, the one who sings better than seems strictly necessary. These are the bonds that make a strict life inhabitable, not grand declarations. Familiar presence, reliable pattern, the quiet knowledge that when the bell rings, many other men will rise too. You do not have to like them all equally. You do not have to understand them all, but you do have to make a life with them. Over time, that itself becomes a kind of shelter. We should be careful not to idealize it. Some monasteries had quarrels. Some had factions. Some had men who were difficult, vain, lazy, cold-hearted, or simply weary of the whole business. The rule exists in part because communities do not drift naturally toward harmony. They require shape. They require correction. They require mercy. It is likely that most monasteries contain all three: quiet fidelity, small selfishness, and occasional real warmth. That mixture is not a flaw in the story. It is what makes the story believable. And yet, even allowing for that, something tender remains. A Benedictine monastery asks men to grow old together, to watch one another weaken, to serve one another in sickness, to hear the same voices through season after season, to carry the dead in memory and the living in patience. That is not romance. It is something older and in its own way, deeper. By now the light outside has begun to change. Afternoon leans toward evening. The house still works, still prays, still holds its people in the same old pattern. But underneath the labor and the order sits a question that no rule can fully answer for them. What did they hope for? What did they fear? What waited in their minds? Beyond the stair, beyond the choir, beyond the grave. As the day begins to thin, the monastery turns inward toward belief. As the light begins to lean toward evening, the monastery turns inward, not away from the world, just deeper into the meaning it has been giving the day all along. The bells, the meals, the silence, the work, the shared sleeping room, the careful order of the hours. None of it existed by itself. All of it pointed somewhere. A Benedictine monastery was built on the hope that a human life, cut into prayers and duties, could be shaped toward God. The rule of St. Benedict ties that hope to obedience, humility, restraint of speech, care for the weak, and the steady round of the divine office. So belief in a monastery was not only a matter of ideas, it was practice. Stand here, bow now, sing this psalm, keep silence, confess faults, wait your turn, care for the sick, rise in the night. A monk did not merely think his faith, he walked it, wore it, and lost sleep for it. That is one reason medieval belief can feel so heavy and so gentle at once. It lived in the body, but always looked beyond the body. St. Benedict's world was also full of judgment. That sounds stern, because it was stern. In the rule, humility is tied to the thought of standing before God's judgment. The monk is asked to remember his faults, to bend his will, and to keep before him both fear and hope, not fear alone. That would be too simple. The point was not panic. The point was watchfulness. A monk was meant to live as if his soul mattered every day, not only at the end. This gave the monastery a strange calm, not modern calm, not the calm of thinking everything will probably work out, a different calm, the calm of repetition joined to meaning. If a man feared judgment, then Matins mattered. If he hoped for mercy, then confession mattered. If he believed the dead still needed prayer, then memory mattered. The whole house became a way of taking invisible things seriously. At Canterbury, that inner life had a very public setting. This was not an unknown priory in a far valley. It stood at one of the great religious centres of England. In the later 12th century, one event changed the feel of Canterbury for centuries after. The murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket in the cathedral on December 29th, 1170. Within a few days, his tomb had become a pilgrimage site, and he was canonized in 1173. That meant belief at Canterbury was not only about the regular Benedictine pattern. It was also shaped by martyrdom, relics, memory, and the arrival of pilgrims who came seeking grace, healing, or help. That changes the air of the place. A monk of Christ Church after 1170 was still wakened for Matins, still eating in the refectory, still walking the cloister. But he was also living in a church marked by a very recent saint. Thomas Becket's death made Canterbury a major destination for pilgrims, and the cathedral's own historical material notes how central pilgrimage became to its identity. So the ordinary monk lived beside both routine and fame. He prayed in a place where other people arrived carrying griefs, vows, and hopes of miracles. Relics belong to that world too. To modern ears, relics can sound odd at first, like objects from a story someone half believes. But medieval Christians did not treat them as museum pieces. A relic linked heaven to earth in a tangible way. It made sanctity local, near enough to visit, near enough to kneel beside, near enough to carry in processions, guard in shrines, and remember on feast days. At Canterbury, Becket's shrine later became one of the most famous in Europe, and even before that grander shrine, his tomb drew devotion quickly. That means a monk's day was lived among layers of presence: the living brothers, the remembered dead, the saints, the relics, the names spoken in prayer, the names carved or recorded, the names no longer known, but still folded into the house by custom and burial. A monastery did not think of death as a sudden interruption to community. It thought of death as something the community had to prepare for, pray through, and remember after. So what did a monk fear? He feared sin, not only large public sin, also hidden fault, carelessness, pride, slackness in prayer, disobedience. Benedict is very interested in the small inward turnings of the will, the ways a monk can cling to self rather than yield to the rule in the common life. That is why the rule speaks so often of humility and obedience. The monastery was trying to shape not only action but desire. And what did he hope for? Mercy, perseverance, a good death, the grace to keep going, the chance that all these bells and psalms and small obediences might, in the end, make him a better man than he would have been alone. That hope is quieter than heroic faith, but it may be closer to daily truth. Most monks were not aiming to become legends. They were trying to remain faithful through ordinary time. This is where belief becomes almost sleepy in its rhythm. The same psalms return. The same feasts return. Lent comes again. Easter comes again. The dead are remembered again. The candles are lit again. Nothing flashy, just recurrence. A life measured not by novelty, but by return. Benedict's rule is built on that kind of repetition. And Canterbury's later pilgrimage life added another circle to it. The repeated arrival of people asking the saint for help. Gervase of Canterbury fits softly here. He was a monk of Christ Church and a chronicler, which means he lived in a house where sacred time and historical time touched each other every day. He knew not only the liturgical year, but the weight of events. Men like him stood where memory was part of duty. In a priory, history was not safely over. It was prayed through, copied down, and added to the meaning of the place. The beliefs of such a house were not all serene. That would be too neat. There was fear of judgment, fear of dying badly, fear of not being ready, fear that one's own will was still too alive and too stubborn. But there was also deep comfort in structure. The monk did not need to invent a path to God each morning. The path was under his feet already. He only had to keep walking it, and there was comfort in place. To pray where others had prayed, to kneel where a martyr had died, to hear pilgrims arrive from far off, to know that the church held relics, tombs, names, and memories far older than one tired monk's passing moods. That can steady a person. Even now, perhaps. In the 12th century, it surely did. Canterbury's own records still describe the cathedral as a major pilgrimage destination rooted in this long sacred history. For all that, a monastery did not spend every hour gazing straight at heaven. Belief had to live beside chores. A man might contemplate judgment in choir, then trip over a hem on the stair. He might think about saints, then go count loaves. He might hear of miracles, then catch a cold. That is not a failure of faith. It is its setting. Medieval belief was not airy. It had wax on its fingers and damp in its shoes. and perhaps that is why it feels so human. The monk feared death, but still needed supper. He hoped for mercy, but still had to rise in the dark. He believed in saints, but still lived among ordinary brothers who coughed, snored, and occasionally lost their place in the chant. The great invisible world did not replace the small visible one. It rested on it. By now, the day is bending toward evening. Belief has done what it always does in a monastery. It has taken the ordinary things, the hardest things, and the repeated things, and laid a meaning over them. The bells will sound again. The light will thin. Doors will close. Fire will glow lower. And with that, the house will pass from faith in daylight into faith in the dark. By evening, the monastery begins to fold itself inward, not all at once, slowly. The work thins first, then the light, then the sound. A door shuts, a bench is left still, a passage empties. What was busy in the day becomes careful now, smaller, softer. The house has been awake a long time, so have the men inside it. This is the hour when warmth matters most. Not much warmth, just enough. A fire banked low, a sleeve holding a little of the day's heat, the memory of bread, the last dim gold on stone. The body, which has been asked to do so much, begins to ask for less, to sit, to stop, to be let alone for a while. Compline comes near the end of that long asking, the last office of the day, the last gathering in church before sleep. In Benedict's rule, night silence is treated with special care after Compline. That tells us what the evening was meant to become, not lively, not social, still, guarded. A house settling under prayer into quiet. So imagine the church again, not the church of Matins with its black winter shock. This one is gentler, tired. The lamps are low. Voices are lower too. The monks know the day is nearly done. A psalm, a response, a prayer. Nothing hurried now, nothing fresh. Just familiar words finding tired mouths. Then the cloister after. That is one of the best moments to picture. The air cooler, the sky darkening above the garth, the arches holding shadow. A few steps, no wasted speech. A monk crosses from church to daughter and hears his own sandals more clearly than he did in the day. Another moves ahead of him, no more than a shape. A cough sounds somewhere and then is gone. Water, perhaps, still moves in some channel or drain beyond sight. Canterbury's planned waterworks meant the priory had running water and managed drainage built into its daily life. And at night, that unseen movement would have made its own faint company. This is not silence in the absolute sense. Monasteries rarely had that. Silence meant restraint, fewer voices, chosen quiet. English heritage makes the point well. Monastic silence was about shaping sound, not erasing it. So evening would still have had its little noises. Cloth shifting, a latch, footsteps, a low breath. The wooden complaint of old furniture. But the house was trying as best it could to lower itself toward rest. A monk at this hour is mostly tired. Not thoughtful in some grand way, just tired. His feet know the path. His hands know what comes next. Loosen this, fold that. Set this down. Keep the order. The beauty of monastic night is that very little has to be invented. The day has already told him what to do. The house has already told him where to go. In the daughter, the room gathers bodies again. The same room that emptied in darkness will fill in darkness too. Beds, blankets, wool, breathing. A few men still moving more slowly than the rest. An older monk easing himself down with care. A younger one, trying not to make noise and making a little anyway. Someone already half asleep before lying down. someone else knowing with mild sorrow that the night will not be long enough. That may be the truest evening thought in a monastery. Not fear, not ecstasy, just the plain knowledge that sleep will be short. Matins waits ahead. The bell is not angry, but it is certain. Benedict built the night office into the very frame of the life, and no amount of evening coziness could quite let a monk forget that the dark would call him back before dawn. So sleep comes with a shadow in it, a useful shadow, a familiar one. The monk lies down knowing he will rise again soon enough. That rhythm must have shaped the mind as much as the clock. Rest was real, but never endless. Night was shelter, but also interval. This is where old age would have felt especially sharp. The young can throw themselves at a bed. The old must negotiate with it. An old monk, after many winters, would know evening differently. More stiffness, more care in lowering the body, more small pains speaking up now that the day's tasks had stopped drowning them out. Benedict's concern for the old and the weak belongs here too. The rule knows that bodies do not age evenly and that a house must leave room for weakness. And yet the old monk hears the same quiet as the young one. The same room, the same dark, the same promise of the bell. There is something leveling in that. The priory gathers all of them into one night. Outside, Canterbury is still there. The town beyond the walls, homes, streets, mud. Maybe a distant voice, maybe none. But inside the priory, the world has narrowed to the human basics again. Blanket, breath, dark. A little warmth held close, the hope of sleep. Gervase of Canterbury knew nights like these. We cannot recover his every evening. No one can. But as a monk of Christ Church, and later sacristan, he lived inside this cycle of closing church, ordered quiet and returning dark. That is one of the steadying things about having one named monk in view. He helps remind us that the night belonged not to an idea of monasticism, but to real tired men with real tasks behind them and more waiting before dawn. By now the pace of the house is very slow. A thought lingers, then fades, the body loosens, the stone keeps its cold, the blankets keep what warmth they can. Someone turns over, someone sighs, then less again. No one needs a speech now, no lesson, no argument. The day has already taught enough. The bells rang, the prayers were said, the work was done, the meal was eaten, the body was managed, the brothers were endured, and perhaps cherished too. Belief laid its quiet weight over everything. Now comes the part with almost no words. This is the monastery at its sleepiest. The church dark, the cloister empty, the kitchen at rest, the chapter house closed, the water still moving somewhere, the sky fully turned, the men breathing in one long shared room, waiting without really wanting to wait for the next bell. Pause, and almost before sleep has had time to settle deeply, the same old life gathers itself again in the dark. Because night in a monastery is never only ending, it is also beginning. Somewhere beyond sleep, beyond dream, beyond the little warmth left in the blankets, the bell already waits with its patient claim on the hour. The candle is low now. The room is dark. The stone keeps its own counsel. The monk sleeps, or almost sleeps, or drifts in that shallow place where the body has gone still, but some small part of the mind is still listening for the bell. The blanket holds a little warmth. Not much. Enough for now. Around him, the others are quiet too. One breath, then another. A shift in the dark, then stillness again. The priory rests. The cloister is empty. The refectory is bare. The chapter house waits without voices. The church stands in shadow, holding the last of the day inside its stone. Somewhere water moves, very softly, through pipe, through channel, past wall and dark ground. The sort of sound you do not hear in the day, only now, only when almost everything else has gone. Pause. Outside the walls, Canterbury sleeps in its own way. Houses, yards, mud in the street, a dog perhaps, a cart left still until morning. But inside the priory, the world has grown small again. A bed, a breath, a bell not yet ringing. This is how the life was made, not from grand moments, from repeated ones. Cold stares, wool sleeves, bread in the hand, a bowl on a board, a psalm in the dark, a brother nearby, a door closed softly at night. St. Benedict knew that a life could be shaped by hours, not by hurry, not by novelty, by return. Return to prayer, return to work, return to the table, return to sleep, return always to the bell. And so a monk at Canterbury, or in any Benedictine house like it, did not so much chase meaning as live inside it. Stone underfoot, rule overhead, other men all around, the same paths, the same turns, the same winter dark, the same first light. Years would pass like this, one season into the next, one novice growing older, one old monk growing slower, one brother buried, another taking his place in choir. The life changed, the life stayed. That may be the strangest comfort in it. Not that it was easy, it was not. Not that it was gentle, not always, but that it was known. A man could be tired in a known place, cold in a known place, hungry, ill, faithful, dull, patient, restless, devout, sleepy, all in a known place. The priory held him, the bells held him, the days held him, even the nights did. And now the night is nearly all there is. No task, no reading voice, no clatter from the kitchen, no footstep in the cloister, only the dark, the shared breathing, the faint sense of walls standing firm around sleep, the candle, the dark, the quiet. And somewhere ahead, though not yet, the bell, but not now. Now there is rest, a little warmth, a little peace, a little time with no need to rise. The monastery waits, the men sleep, the stone says nothing, and the night goes on, softly, patiently, until it is time. Good night.